So you're gonna crust this with as much seasoning as possible. Now it looks like a lot of salt. It'll tend to explode on you. That'll also cause it to shrivel. All right, look at that. Holy carnitas. Well, welcome back to Dennis's Sustainable Kitchen. Hoy, we're doing Insta Carnitas. I'm getting them ready in the morning and one of those things of the set it and forget it type approaches. And we're making carnitas in a little bit of a different twist. For many, when you see them in different parts of Mexico, they're done in cazo, right? Which are usually made of either of metal or of adobe, like clay, which to me is has the more authentic flavor. I would equivalent that to it gets seasoned as you cook it, kind of like a molcajete. But that requires a lot of time, a lot of space that a lot of us don't have, right? And it's either gas or wood. You know, firewood makes the best. But if you have one of those huge parties, un reventón, boda, something that's culturally significant or that has a big crowd, then yeah, you use that and you have the space, right? It's that showcase piece. When people show up to your house, tienes a big ass caso, smells like carnitas, and then you got people mouth watering around it for hours. And generally speaking, when you cook in a caso, you're looking at a 3-hour process at least, depending on how much you're making. It's slow and it takes the time. And essentially, it's confit pork shoulder or just pork in general. One of the things I love about pork is that can utilize the whole animal, the whole pig. And so I don't have the space nor the yard nor everything. So how do I make something fast? And by fast, I mean within 2 hours and in that set it and forget it motion. Así que boneless pork shoulder, huh? And this is roughly 1.4 kilos, so 114.40 grams. Una cebolla blanca, white onion, it's 180. One ajo, we're just going to crush it. This is 38 grams. And 2 orange naranja oranges. And we're going to juice these. So we'll use the juice. I'm also kosher salt, voy a usar 20 grams, 20 gramos. And then laurel, bay leaf. It's 2 bay leaves and it's about half a gram. And then a quarter teaspoon of oregano, which about a quarter to a half gram, but it's the Mexican oregano, seco, dry. And in this case, if there a big difference between fresh and dry, yes, dry is meant to be cooked over long periods of time. So if you're doing any kind of braise, confit, tipo de caldo, dry seasoning or dry herbs are meant to be cooked at longer period of time. A quick overview, we'll just cut the pork shoulder in half. I'm just going to cut it in 2 pieces. I'm going to crust it with salt, sear it. At the same time, I'm going to be utilizing 250 to 300 milliliters of water as the base, and then with the juice and everything, and cook it for roughly an hour, and then we'll go from there. So some of the questions or some of the preguntas I've gotten is, what is my carnitas are bland, right? Or why are they so or they don't have seasoning, or they get turned into mush? And there's a couple things with that. So if you're going to be doing it outside in a thing, you definitely want fat. You're making a confit, entonces usas manteca. And, that's the thing with pork is that, there's a lot of fat already in it, but you need manteca to keep it from drying out. So in this case, I'm not using manteca. I'm essentially steaming the meat, but in such a way that the water becomes that consommé, that flavored broth. And because it's in a pressure cooker, your meat doesn't dry out. So when you finish it, you're going to have a larger intact piece of meat. And essentially you shred it, like shredded meat. So carne deshebrada tends to be, you think of that, you think of beef, shredded beef. So it's not as falling apart as sometimes people say. And that allows you, one, to eat it moist, you know, nice big strands of carnitas right in a fresh tortilla, no? But then you can cool it, and then in the broth, that's an important piece. So cook it, cool it within its own broth so it doesn't dry out. Que no se seque. And then if you let it sit, reposar, especially for the next day, or like my case, dinner in the evening, the flavors are concentrating, remember? Then when you reheat it in its own broth, then you can fry it, ya sea con manteca or just with its own little fat that came with it, or you don't have to fry it. No, si quieres chicharrón, by all means, that stuff's delicious. So we have the two oranges. Now, why did I peel them? I don't like to get that oil from the peel. Siento que it makes it amargo, bitter. So I take it off. So where did I peel it? Well, so where did I peel it? I don't like the oil that comes in the peel of the orange. So I take it off. I feel like that gives it a little bit of a bitterness flavor. And then that's why I juice them. If you have a juicer, great, even better. Can you use store-bought juice? Sí y no. If as a last resort, sí. But don't use the freaking Sunny Delight, you know. Look for the juice that's like as pure as possible, concentrate or not from concentrate. But just get a few oranges and squeeze them. Fresh is always the best. And even you can even go to your local Mexican store, Hispanic store, and they'll give you fresh squeezed orange juice if that comes to it. So yeah, so you can get sumo from La Tienda Mexicana around the corner. Now, so we have the garlic, and that's going straight into the oil. So here's the Instant Pot. So that goes in there. I have the laurel, the oregano, that goes in there. And then cebolla blanca, right, the white onion. This one, I'm just going to cut it into about 4 pieces. So just going to quarter it and then essentially then just take it apart, throw it in the pot. And I'm also laying this on the bottom because this essentially makes a little bit of a bed for the meat, right? And that way, when I push the meat, it's not directly on the metal, and less chance of reduces the risk of reduces that opportunity of it burning at the bottom. Porque there's not going to be a lot of liquid, but the pork in itself has a lot of water and a lot of fat. So when you steam it, all of that comes out, and so you're going to end up with a lot more liquid inside than what you came out with. Y entonces, if you add a lot of liquid, then the water comes out of the pork. Then tienes carnitas ahogadas, basically drowned carnitas, and then all your flavor goes into the broth. When you do a braise, essentially you're boiling out the water from the meat, so el sabor comes out. So what I'm doing instead is a little bit of a different approach where I'm going to do a French braise, donde you sear the outside of the meat. And so you season it and then you sear it on all sides. Give it that caramelization, right? That Maillard reaction flavor. And then I throw it in there. And that searing helps also como una costra, like an outer layer, so it doesn't, one, fall apart, but two, stay moist. And it gives it a more profound flavor. So I'm just going to cut this in, essentially, I'm going to cut this in 3 pieces because this one's already long. So that way, and I'm not taking any of the fat off because quiero la manteca, it's going to render. So what I'm actually doing first, though, is going to be using this one. So I'm going to cook it, and then that fat's going to melt off a bit. And then I'll use these. I'll sear them on all sides. And then from there, they go straight into the pot. And to speed up the process for the steam, I'm going to get some hot water going. So, that helps it a little bit. I'm using a tea kettle, which, so, because I only need about a cup and a half. But you can use just the stove. So you're going to crust this with as much seasoning as possible. And remember, this is about 20 grams. Now, why am I using it? It looks like a lot of salt. Keep in mind that I'm not seasoning the inside. And then when you're cooking it in, as it releases the water, you're seasoning the consomme a bit. Now, for salt, in this case, I'm using about 1.25% of the weight. And I think a percent, 1% of every kilo, a good starting point. You don't want to over salt it, porque puedes echarle sal después. You can salt it once it's done. And then the consomme itself will get salty. And you can always reduce the consomme, especially if you're going to save it from one day to the next, or you're going to cool it down and save it for a later use. Now, can you use pepper? Yes, if you want. It's your dish. It's not a common ingredient. I would say a more regular use, but you can definitely use it. All right, so we're gonna sear this. We'll utilize, that's on the kid is that high heat oil, right? So in this case, we got that frizzle. And so I am gonna add a generous amount. I do want it to get crispy, quesadore, to develop that flavor. Once everything's seared, keep an eye on the bottom of your pan because you're getting the sucks, right? And that's flavor, sabor. And then you deglaze it with the orange juice, con the jugo de naranja. Then you add all of that into the pot. Add the hot water or just water, and you're good to go. Ahora, what if you wanted to cut this even smaller? You can. You don't have to sear it. Pero if you're not going to, if you're just going to cook it in broth, you're going to have that más carne hervida taste if you don't have fat, right? Because essentially in a pressure cooker, el vapor, the steam is not going away, right? And that's what happens when you cook it in a cazo, in a Dutch oven, right? You're boiling away the moisture and you're leaving it in the fat. So the fat keeps it juicy. And so in this case, we're using its own water. Now you could also utilize like a chicken stock, or if you make your own pork stock, And again, I'm just trying to get the meat seared, give it that flavor. Y empecé with the fattiest one because I'm going to use some of that manteca, right? Render off some of that fat, and that'll help sear the rest of it. Now, why not use just pure manteca? One, I'm trying to go with the more lighter fat option. But two, manteca, when you sear, has a lower smoke point. So it'll burn a lot easier. There, now we got our decent color on the skin. So notice there is more oil in there. If you don't want all that oil, you can always strain it out. And then all you're left with is the sooks at the bottom. Throw in your juice, glaze it, and you're good to go. Ahora, cuando sale furiosa, meaning it's tough, it's unshreddable. If you've done it in a pressure cooker, the first thing is it probably wasn't cooked, wasn't cooked long enough. All right. So for this one, these pieces, I'm going to go with roughly an hour, and then allow it to rest for about 15 minutes to depressurize, and then remove the pressure. You don't want to remove the pressure right away. One, it'll tend to explode on you, like but that'll also cause it to shrivel a lot faster, and it also toughens the meat. All right, so now let's do that. Notice that it's getting oily, and that's what happens when you make carnitas. So what if you want to make this faster? Can you make this smaller? Yes. You can cut it in like 2-inch cubes. However, if you just want to go straight into the pot, that's fine. You're not going to get that browning taste, kind of that small chicharron flavor, which I think is key when you make carnitas, right? And then when you make them again, you reheat them, azora, you fry them, get them all crispy. Can you do these in the air fryer for crisping them up? I wouldn't recommend it. Technically, you can. I've actually never really done it that way. My intuition or my thing, it'll probably dry them out. Technically you could, but I think when you air fry something, you're removing moisture. So you're just drying it out. So the best thing, I think, if you are going to go that route, is go with the highest heat possible. So preheat your air fryer to as hot as it gets, then put the thing in and watch the time. So at least you get high heat and you start to brown them and hopefully they don't dry out as much. If somebody tries that out, let me know how it goes. But yeah, I think for the air fry method on that one, I don't know. I wouldn't go that route. Now you don't want to go too high on the heat because then you'll burn the bottom. And I want the bottom, when you make the carnitas, all the little juicy bits, I want those back. So what I will do is I'll end up straining this and then I'll deglaze it and throw that back into it. Now our water's ready to go. So as soon as the meat's all in there, can you make these crispy as soon as they come out of the Instant Pot? Yes. You just need a lot of high heat. So that might be a way to test out with the air fryer, actually, now that I think about it. As you shred it, it's hot already. You're just going to want to get that crispiness on the outside. That might be a way. You can do it in the broiler at an oven at 500 degrees, or just get some of that manteca and fry it. Starting to smell chicharron already. Now, can you store carnitas crispy? That's a loaded question, but if you want to store them crispy, then you're making chicharron. When people hear the word chicharron, many think of crackle, no? When you cook the pork skin. Pero chicharron means also like crispy. It's like when you fry it. So if you're going to want to store them to make them crispy, also you're going to fry them, then air them out. It's en fríen bien. Because if you put them in a container and then you cover them, they're going to sweat. Y entonces your crispiness se va a la torre. So yes, fry them, let them cool, let them air out for a while. Y de ahí put them in a container and then you can cover them. And actually another way, what's in the ranchos in the old days, cuando hacían un puerco, a cochino, a big pork, all that fat, all that confit, you'd store the leftovers within the fat. So you're storing, and there was a way to preserve it, since there was no refrigeration. So this is the key if you're going to be doing it this way, browning it. This is where the opportunity for you to build the most flavor. So you do want to brown it, dorarlo as much as you can. All right. So now I'm going to strain this real quick because I want the bottom. Now that's all sabor, that's all flavor. Right? So that's what you call the glazing. Now the heat's off, right? And there, most of it's out. And now I'm going to add the cup and a quarter water, and I'll let it go for an hour. And then you're good to go. So then in an hour, we'll shut off. We'll leave it another 15 minutes, give it some time to depressurize, and we'll open it, check it out, and should have some pretty damn good carnitas. And again, if you open it and it's still like tough, and it needs more time, then you can close it up again, turn it back on, and give it another, whatever you think it needs, 15 minutes or something like that. Then again, go through the depressurizing process. But as soon as you open it, you should be able to just get some tongs, and if it shreds apart, You know, look for the thickest piece and make sure that's, if that's cooked, everything else is. All right. Well, you know, that's part one of carnitas, instant carnitas. You know, let me know if you guys test this out or try it out. You know, like, subscribe, share, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care. All right. Look at that. Holy carnitas.